Good evening, everyone. My name is Jay LeBrun. I am the Superintendent of Schools of the Plattsburgh City School District. I'm very grateful that all of you can be with us. This will be the first of a series of parent information presentations about our 2020 fall reopening plans. I can tell you that tonight's presentation will feature the same general explanations and review of district-wide reopening as will tomorrow's and Wednesday's, although tonight's presentation will focus a little bit more deeply and specifically on issues which may be of interest to elementary students and their families. I'm joined tonight by some colleagues who are with me but off screen. They are Megan Manson, who is a publication specialist at Champlain Valley Educational Services, so thank you to her for helping to broadcast this presentation. I'm joined also by Carrie Zales, our district's Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction. Thank you to them, and once again, thank you to you all for being here. At current count, we have approximately 115 viewers. I would expect that that number will climb, and I'm delighted that so many people have made time in their busy lives to learn about our reopening plan. Many parents have sent questions which are very specific to their circumstance or their child's specific needs. And because of that specificity, some of those will not be reviewed tonight. Some of those, in fact, deal with matters of privacy. But those parents should expect, and many have already received, direct replies from myself or district personnel. So if you have very specific questions, we very certainly welcome them, though they may not be appropriate for a meeting and a presentation such as tonight's, but we encourage that you continue to send those. And for review, the best email address to which these questions may be submitted is questions@plattscsd.org. Again, the word questions at plattscsd.org. Feel free also to advance any questions to myself or other district administrators. We will ensure that responses are sent to you. I'm now going to share my screen. There's a presentation which will guide tonight's activity. I'll ask my colleague to put that up for you all to see. And at some point this evening, my colleague Ms. Zales will be articulating the presentation, but you'll always have the slides to look at and see what topics we're discussing in a moment. Again, I'll reiterate, if there are questions or areas of concerns outside of these specific topics, we welcome them and invite your direct outreach. These are the agenda items which I plan to review with you tonight. First, we will identify our situation and how we all came to be in this most unfortunate pandemic-driven situation. We will overview the three possible modes of instructional delivery. I believe at this point these are increasingly familiar to you all, but we will talk specifically about these. We will then engage in a more detailed review of the hybrid mode because, as I believe is generally understood at this point, as things stand right now, it will be the hybrid mode of instructional delivery in which we plan to start this school year. A very important area of consideration for everyone is health and safety protocols, and we will outline some of these as part of tonight's presentation. I'll also spend a few moments talking about some of the specific categories of questions which we've received, notably transportation and technology. We'll spend some time reviewing building expectations, clearing up any confusion which may exist, and I will address that later this evening. Topics such as mass movement throughout the buildings, meal consumption, and the like. I will now and again several times throughout this presentation stress the need for flexibility. I will deal more with that and the reasoning for such later, but let's be clear that this will need to be the most overarching consideration as we all move forward together. We will all need to remain flexible. In light of the announcement that the district will start the year in the hybrid mode of instruction, though this would be equally or more pressing and significant if and when the district moves into remote mode of instructional delivery, we'll briefly discuss childcare. Childcare is an area of significant concern for some families, and it is an area in which we have yet to figure everything out, but in which we continue to work with our local partners. I will overview a revised school calendar, which is fairly straightforward, and then I will end with a series of frequently asked questions, those things that may not have been dealt with as part of this presentation proper. Last spring was difficult for all of us. Districts around the state did the best they could with very little notice about school closure. I remain very proud of our district's response last spring. I am equally proud of our plans and the work that we've invested to prepare for the upcoming school year and as we move forward through this ongoing pandemic situation. State and federal leaders, and I believe that everyone has seen this on the news many times, have encouraged schools to reopen this fall, and they've provided varied and frankly sometimes contradictory information about how this can and should happen. Governor Cuomo has established, and I think many people are familiar with this, a 5%, 9% rule, which effectively states that schools in New York State can reopen so long as the regional infection rate where they are located is at or below 5%, and they may stay open until such point as that infection rate reaches 9%. Infection rates around the state, certainly in our area, are and have been for some time well below those figures, and it would seem as though some degree of reopening is therefore clearly authorized by the governor, though he has expressed that that may take any number of forms. And I will review again with you tonight the three different potential modes of instructional delivery which we have developed. More recently, the governor has expressed that student, parent, and faculty comfort should guide reopenings, not those strict infection rate percentages. I can tell you that this is a difficult and vague standard, as parent and faculty staff sentiment about reopening varies wildly. We are doing our very best to address these competing and very often irreconcilable difference of perspective, but as I'm sure you are already aware, there are many views about school reopening. The State Education Department and the Department of Health have also released some reopening guidance, and these two feature some contradictory information, although I will say they have been very useful in spelling out health and safety expectations. We will review those tonight, and I will again say that I have found those documents and that guidance most valuable insofar as health and safety considerations are concerned. The district's first draft reopening plan, the very first and initial plan which was released, was submitted to the State Education Department before the July 31st deadline, and was not returned to us with any concerns or required changes. That original plan identified three modes of instructional delivery which remain, but differed from the current plan in that it did not provide for a parent option for remote instruction. It differed from the current plan in that the hybrid mode featured a different system of student rotation that has now been introduced, and it differed perhaps most significantly in that at that time we had hoped, the district's reopening planning committee had hoped, that we could start the year in full in-person mode of instructional delivery, whereas we now have updated the plan to feature the hybrid mode of instructional delivery to start the year. Feedback from parents and faculty alike suggested that there was not broad comfort with reopening in that full in-person mode. And the reopening committee therefore updated the plan to feature hybrid as the projected starting mode for the school year. By now, the three modes of instructional delivery are likely very familiar to you all, and this is great and truly important because it remains possible, if not likely, that we will spend time operating in each and all of these modes before this pandemic is resolved. I'll deal first with in-person mode of instructional delivery. If circumstances, and these circumstances may include a continued low infection rate or increasing comfort on the part of students, parents, and faculty, we may explore at some point this fall a transition from the hybrid mode of delivery to everyday, full-day instruction. There's no doubt in my mind, nor frankly that of the members of the Reopening Planning Committee, that this mode, this full in-person mode, is preferable in that it maximizes direct student-teacher interaction. But there's also no doubt that this mode, full in-person instruction, involves the most dense congregation of students, and that it most strains our ability to properly socially distance in the school setting, and frankly, that it most escalates people's sensitivities about health and safety. The Reopening Planning Committee feels strongly that in-person mode of delivery is educationally preferable, and we hope, as I'm sure all of you hope as well, that there will eventually be enough comfort or a changing set of circumstances surrounding the virus to allow for a return to this full-day in-person instruction. For now, however, that does not appear to be imminent. Later in this presentation, I'll address and review with you reopening trends that I have observed around the state, and unfortunately, these tend to be and appear to be moving away from in-person reopenings as opposed to trending towards such. I will briefly review our hybrid plan, and then later my colleague, because again, this is the plan in which we plan to begin the school year, will review it in somewhat greater detail. The hybrid plan that you will see in the revised draft reopening plan now features a system of student rotation which is different than that which we had originally projected. Originally, and at that July 31st first draft of the reopening plan date, we had envisioned an alternating system of student attendance where secondary students would come every other day and elementary students would each attend half days. We have transitioned this based on parent feedback to a more consistent arrangement in which students will all attend school 2 days per week, and that will be either in a Monday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Friday arrangement. We'll work remotely and more independently on those other 2 days on which they are not attending in-person instruction, and wherein all students throughout the district will participate in live synchronous and direct remote instruction on Wednesdays. You may hear us refer to Wednesdays as Unified Wednesdays, as this will be the only day within the hybrid mode of instructional delivery that all students and their teachers will be together as complete class cohorts. And again, we will explore the hybrid mode in more detail and more specifically shortly. Let me, before we do that though, review the remote mode of instructional delivery. And this may be of great importance as we move through the fall, because for a whole variety of reasons, and these may include a surge in regional or statewide COVID infection rates. It may include an incidence of infection from within our school community. It may include high student or faculty absent rates, or may even include, as we saw in the springtime, a government decree, but we may need to again transition to a full remote mode of instructional delivery. We all learned a great deal from the springtime school closure. Technology use and competence necessarily increased dramatically on all of our part. If we do move back to a fully remote mode of instructional delivery this fall, students will benefit daily from direct virtual instruction by their teachers. This will differ from the approach which was employed for remote instructional delivery in the spring. The actual schedules will differ somewhat between elementary and secondary levels, but there's no doubt that there were important lessons learned and growth which occurred in the delivery of remote instruction in the spring that will make for a better, richer, more authentic, and above all, more interactive process should we need to return to that mode. Before I defer to my colleague to review the hybrid mode of instructional delivery in greater detail, there's a few related but important considerations which I want to address. The first, and it is repetitive by design, is the need for flexibility. I've just defined for you all 3 different modes of instruction which could be employed at any time during the school reopening. We may need to move swiftly between these modes for reasons such as those which I've listed or others which are not even yet foreseen. Doing so is going to require flexibility on all of our parts, and I would submit to you all that it will be important for families and students to have at least some degree of familiarity with all of those modes of delivery, not just that in which we plan to start the school year. so that we are all together better able to move between these should the need arise. Regardless of the mode of instruction in which we start the school year, and again, we currently project that that will be the hybrid mode of delivery, there are certain areas on which we will focus upon our return to school. Again, my colleague will speak to these in greater depth, but they include the building of student-teacher relationships, the building of technological comfort, and this can include both hardware and software, such as our learning management platform, Microsoft Teams. And we will focus on assessing and supporting student deficits, both academic and social-emotional, because there can be no doubt that the spring school closure caused trauma in us all, and that significant deficits exist. Finally, because the Reopening Planning Committee felt strongly that these deficits are best addressed through maximum student-teacher contact time, I'll express and explain quickly that that is the reason for which the initial draft featured a projection of opening in this full in-person instruction. Now, clearly there has been sufficient feedback to move beyond and away from that mode, but please understand that at every turn in this planning process, students' best interests, be they academic or social emotional, were prioritized. Another bit of very common, frequent feedback which we received upon the release of the initial plan and which has yielded a significant change has been the request for a remote parent instruction, that during times of in-person or hybrid instructional delivery, parents who are not comfortable with returning their children to school will be provided some remote option. I am pleased to say that the plan has been updated to now feature that parent remote option, though it is very important to note that the nature of that remote instructional delivery, when instruction is taking place in either in-person or hybrid modes, will not parallel and will not be the same as that which will be made available during a period of full remote instruction when teachers are able to focus solely on that remote mode of instructional delivery. A great deal of information about this is listed in the plan, but I do believe that it's important that parents keep that distinction in mind as they're considering whether or not they would prefer to send their children back to school in the mode of the moment, which we forecast to start the year as hybrid, or whether they wish to exercise this remote parent option. I'm certainly available to discuss this matter and that topic further with any parents who have questions, as are my administrative colleagues. We welcome your outreach about that. At this point, I will give everyone in our audience a break from my voice, and I will invite Carrie Zales, who again is our director, our assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction, to outline our hybrid instructional plan in greater detail and to elaborate upon those few areas of focus as we start the year. Ms. Zales.
Thank you, Mr. LeBrun, and thank you all for participating in our parent forum. I want to start first with reviewing our hybrid schedule, and if you have the plan in front of you, that would be found on page 60 and 61, so you could reference that either now or after the forum. What you'll find is that we have, for hybrid instruction, broken our student population into two groups. We reference them as Group 1 and Group 2, and each of those groups has times when they will be in live, in-person instruction. They have 2 days of which they will be in remote instruction, and then they have unified Wednesdays, actual live instruction, but done in a remote fashion. We identified that there were some very important parts of the elementary school day that needed to exist, and some fit better in an in-person format than they do remotely. So when you look at the schedule, you're going to find that we have opportunities for homeroom, morning meeting, ELA and math instruction, science and social studies, specials, and an intervention time. Intervention time is really going to be specifically for ELA and math. And each of the schedules obviously has in-person instruction of which you can see the components of the instructional day that will be identified live, in-person instruction, those that will be reviewed in remote instruction, and those that will be done on Unified Wednesdays. I think it's important to note that when students are in remote instruction, they are going to receive work that is going to be based upon the instructional routine that we used last spring. When we looked at the parent survey and the responses that we got back from individuals, we identified that families found the instructional routine to be very helpful because it was something consistent that they could rely on each and every day to organize instruction. And so we have continued with that particular format for this year. When students are in remote instruction, they will be completing portions of that instructional routine. And those days of remote instruction, students will be engaged in learning. It will not be in-person instruction, and there will be no live instruction during that time. So students will be doing things such as independent work that is related to the instruction that they would have received in class. They may have content conveyed to them. They may come in contact with resources and activities via our learning management systems of both Microsoft Teams and Seesaw. I think it's also important that parents and families recognize that Unified Wednesday will be the only exception to this when we talk about remote learning. On those days, students will receive live interactive online delivery, and that will occur every Wednesday. It is a time when teachers can bring their entire classroom together and have application activity, create community within the classroom. We are asking that teachers not use the instructional routine format on that day because we do want this to be application, project-based collaboration, discussion time for classrooms. Teachers will need to record the live instruction and post this recording on Teams every Wednesday that it occurs. I would encourage you to, when you get an opportunity, look at page 60 and 61 because it clearly outlines for you the components of the instructional day that will be covered both in person, remotely, and on Unified Wednesday. We identified 3 priorities that we had for students, no matter what mode of instruction that we were delivering in the fall. And we've done much research into these 3 components, and the first would be our academic targeted instruction priority. When elementary students return in the fall, we will be continuing with our benchmarking assessments. These benchmarking assessments provide information to us in both ELA and math. They will provide baseline information to us. They are normed assessments, so we do gain a baseline information that tells us where students fall in relationship to students of the same age. Those assessments will be given in early September, and they will assist us in verifying the types of interventions and services that students need. They will also give us our baseline in comparison to the last time the students were benchmarked, which would have been last winter. And so we will be able to use these results and compare them so that we can see differentials and identify gaps in student learning. We also will be providing our elementary students with diagnostic assessment, and this will occur at the elementary level in the form of an elementary ELA assessment that goes along with our ELA instructional program, as well as a math benchmark assessment that goes along with our math program. Both of these will be analyzed by teachers, and we will then ensure that students are getting a 6-week interval of targeted instruction, and that targeted instruction is meant purely to deal with the deficits that are identified in our diagnostic assessment. That will be our focus for the first 6 weeks so that we are building those prerequisite skills from the end of the prior school year for students to then build upon as they receive instruction in the current grade level that they are entering. From that point forward, we will move back into the start of instruction for that particular grade level. The second priority is our social emotional learning for our students. And we recognize that since March 16th of last year, this will be the first time that in person we have had an opportunity to connect with our students physically in person. Our plan for our first 2 days of school is to really focus on our establishment of a classroom community and a school community, and this will include teaching routines and expectations of our classroom management plan. New components of those plans will exist: mask wearing, remote learning expectations, social distancing. Those are things that we've never had to have in our classroom management plans before, but surely will play an important role for us this year. This time will also be dedicated to ensuring that students transition back with appropriate guidance and support from an extended school closure. We will have our typical PBIS Kickoff, where students are instructed in the components of being safe, being responsible, and being respectful. In addition to that, other topics that are going to be taught are some pieces of assistance being given with just mental health and how to keep yourself healthy, coping and resilience strategies such as yoga, deep breathing, dance, arts and crafts, singing, mindfulness. We will talk a little bit about how to access student support staff in our schools, and we will share school-wide expectations as well as classroom management plans. We also hope that there will be opportunities for kids to return to somewhat normalcy, see their friends, and have a little bit of fun as they are entering school and entering a new school year. We also will ensure that each morning at the elementary level, there's an opportunity for morning meeting, and this is really an opportunity for students to build connections, both in their classroom community with their teachers. It's a check-in that will happen daily, and it'll incorporate different social emotional learning topics to assist students as they return in this very different situation. And as usual, every year we have a multi-tiered support system for our social emotional learning. So those types of interventions will still exist. Things like check-in, check-out, small group counseling, opportunities for behavior plans. Those pieces will still exist as they have in the past. And then the last district priority, and these are in no specific order, is the technology training that need to happen. At the elementary level, that focus will be on students being able to log in to Office 365 using their district email address and password. Students being able to interact with teachers in Seesaw and Microsoft Teams on a regular basis. Teaching students how to access classroom meetings, and that might be a link to the Seesaw platform via Teams. Students in grades 3 through 5 will be able to access classroom Teams and access materials in their class, and we will teach them how to do that. And students will practice digital citizenship skills in the Microsoft Teams platform. It should be noted that both our ELA and math instruction at the elementary occurs on platforms that are accessible to both teachers and students remotely, so that instruction will occur as well. Attendance in our hybrid format will look very similar to what it looked like prior to March, our typical attendance taking. Students, when they are in person, will have attendance taken in the morning during homeroom. And for those students or any student who is in any type of remote situation, the attendance will be inclusive of all of the instructional components that are listed in our instructional routine. But for any remote instruction, attendance will be based on students logging into live instruction during synchronous times, and when we are in hybrid, that's on Unified Wednesday, or by the subsequent completion of each lesson by the established deadline from their teacher on non-synchronous days. We are able to identify the ability for students to log in and see their presence via Microsoft Teams Analytics, and we are able to run those reports and treat them very similar to our day-by-day and period-by-period attendance. As far as grading goes, grading, no matter which format we are in, either in-person, hybrid, or remote, will replicate our traditional grading that we've experienced prior to COVID. And this will include the information necessary for both at the elementary level data cards and report cards, so that parents are kept abreast of their students' progress throughout the year. And I'll turn this back over to Mr. LeBrun.
Thank you, Ms. Zales. If I can digress ever so briefly in the middle of tonight's presentation, I will do so to say that I appreciate you being with us tonight, that as hard as this situation becomes, and I will be the first to admit that it is hard and may remain that way for some time, I'm grateful, and we should all be grateful for Ms. Zales' efforts and talents. Our students are better served because of these. So I do appreciate, as I'm sure everyone else does, your role here tonight and your ongoing efforts. I also note that I was remiss in not addressing a few just technical details at the start of this presentation, so I'll do that now. The first of these is that I project tonight's presentation might last approximately 1 hour, and based upon our progress through the agenda topics, I'd say we're more or less on track with that schedule. As I did share with you at the start, we have built tonight's presentation, both the topics that we're covering in detail now and some of the frequently asked questions, which we'll review at the close, around the questions we have received thus far, at least the more general ones. Again, some of these questions have been very specific, and we will respond directly to families about those. Some of them have also been fairly late arriving and continue to arrive, and that is wonderful. Just know that district personnel will respond directly to those. The final technical detail is that tonight's presentation will be recorded. It's being captured so it can be posted and made available for future reference, or for anyone who is not able to join us tonight or in the subsequent presentations on the district website. So please know those things. Moving forward with the agenda now, I would like to review with you health and safety protocols. This is very understandably and appropriately an area of great concern for parents and faculty staff, as it should be. These health and safety measures generally fall into two different categories, medical and sanitary, and I'll review them all tonight. So to start, the plan describes and expresses that the district will be providing a great deal of training for staff about the identification of symptomology, as well as some very specific screening measures for students and faculty staff. Now, I know that at this point, as the economic reopening of our state continues, the screening questions are increasingly familiar to us all, perhaps to the point of annoyance at this stage, but I will review those with you nonetheless. They include, and these are the symptoms for which we will train our faculty and staff, we will convey to our parents to be observant about, we will provide signage throughout the buildings, and which will be the basis of the faculty staff daily technology application screening affirmation. The symptoms include cough, shortness of breath or difficulty breathing, a fever of 100 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, chills, muscle pain, sore throat, new loss of taste or smell, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, positive COVID-19 test in the past 14 days, close contact with a confirmed or suspected COVID-19 case in the past 14 days, travel to any region which implicates the state's isolation or quarantine rules. Again, I recognize that those are familiar, but they are and remain very important because parents will be expected to monitor their children daily before school for any and all of those symptoms, and are expected to keep their children at home if any of those are present. Similarly, faculty and staff will need to attest to the non-presence of any of those symptoms. As the plan also outlines, our district has created an isolation room in each and every building where students who display any of those aforementioned symptoms will be kept until their parents can pick them up and take them for possible testing or a medical visit. Students will be supervised in these isolation rooms. I encourage, in fact, I implore any parent who receives a phone call from the school, most likely from the school nurse, indicating that their child has displayed some of those aforementioned symptoms and is awaiting them in the isolation room. I implore them to come to school to retrieve their child as quickly as possible, both for the safety and health of all those other people in the building, and because it is possible, though we will try to space them, that there could be more than one student in the isolation room at any one time. I do believe that families are best served by quickly retrieving their symptomatic child or children from the schools and the isolation rooms when contacted. The governor made some statements in the past couple of weeks about testing and contract tracing obligation on the part of districts. And in short, those are both the domain of people outside of the district, but we will support them both. Testing for COVID-19, whether the presence of the virus or the presence of antibodies, will be conducted by medical providers and in connection or by referral of the Department of Health, the Clinton County Public Health Department. District personnel will not be conducting COVID-19 testing, though we will absolutely provide information and resources to parents about where they can secure such, again, if the aforementioned symptoms are present. Similarly, with contact tracing, the Clinton County Public Health Department is responsible for that function and that process, though district personnel will support that wherever possible. Please know, though, that testing and contact tracing remain the purview of agencies outside of the school district. Again, that is referenced in our plan. Final item under the medical considerations for health and safety protocol concern personal protective equipment, signage, and visual reminders. The return to school visually will be very different for students in that spacing cues on floors and on walls, lists of symptoms, reminders about hand washing, hand disinfecting, mask wearing, and the like will be omnipresent throughout our buildings. So students should be prepared for a constant focus on those things. A lot of parent questions have also focused on our cleaning regimens and sanitary considerations, and I'll address these in some detail now. I have great confidence in our custodial staff, which is both capable and large, that they are able to conduct the appropriate aggressive cleaning and disinfecting each and every evening. We developed many of our current protocols, or our protocols that we will employ during COVID-19, cleaning and disinfecting during the SARS pandemic. We possess some very useful, frankly cutting-edge equipment, including electrostatic disinfecting guns, mist disinfectant sprayers, which will be employed. I can tell you that our ventilation system, of which I've learned a great deal about of late, exceeds all of the state standards. Those of you who have specific interest in this will be heartened and encouraged to know that we are operating in our filtering at a MERV 13 level, which exceeds the state standard of MERV 11. MERV is a standard of particulate filtering, which I guess is a consideration in ventilation systems. MERV 13, at which we're operating, is also the highest level of particulate filtering at which air handlers can operate before potentially starving them for airflow and burning them out. So I was encouraged to learn that from our buildings and grounds staff. Similarly, throughout the fall and until the weather turns cold, and this won't be possible any longer, we plan to open the dampers on our air handling units to maximum capacity. That will allow for a full exchange of the air in any given space 3 times within 1 hour, which I understand to be well above the state standard of 1 time per hour. So if you have specific questions about ventilation, I welcome them. I have reached the extent of my knowledge on that matter, but I will certainly put any interested parties in contact with our Director of Facilities to discuss that further. Students upon their return should also be prepared that the physical classroom space will look very different than it has in years past. And from a distancing and sanitizing point of view, it will be a very positive change. From a richness of educational experience point of view, it unfortunately will not. Necessarily, our classrooms will be somewhat more Spartan in their setup than they have been previously. All extraneous furniture is being removed so as to maximize the spacing of student and teacher desks. At the elementary level, this will be of particular note because many of the what I'll call soft surface items or soft goods, which again make the classroom places more inviting, more enjoyable for students, will be removed because of difficulty in disinfecting those surfaces. So admittedly and in full disclosure, students will be returning to somewhat more barren, although definitely somewhat more easily sanitized physical spaces. I'd like to move now to a discussion about transportation. Our district does not have a large transportation system, and what transportation services we do offer are generally limited to students with disabilities whose individualized education plan, their IEP, specifies the provision of those transportation services. Nonetheless, our buses will continue to operate, and students who are eligible to ride the bus may continue to do so. However, and this is a very important disclaimer, parents need to recognize that social distancing on the bus will not always be possible. We will require that masks be worn at all times on the bus. We will endeavor to distance students as much as possible and to cluster students from the same household into the same seat or seats. We will take student temperatures at loading and preclude any student who registers a temperature at or above 100 degrees Fahrenheit from boarding the bus. But again, from a social distancing perspective, busing is likely the most challenging setting and aspect of our operation. In light of this, some parents may prefer to drop their children at school instead of having them ride the bus. Again, we will provide busing services, but the constraints which exist on the bus insofar as social distancing is concerned need to be acknowledged and recognized. And we support any family that instead chooses to drop their child at school, even though that child may be eligible for transportation, just as we support those that will elect to have their child continue to ride the bus. Moving on to technology, I believe it's generally understood and was certainly a recurring theme throughout the reopening plan that we will employ a different and more consistent or consistently applied learning management platform upon reopening this fall. It is Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams will allow for live interaction or video exchange, video interaction between teachers and students when that is utilized. It also is a very useful platform for the exchange of information and resources between teacher and students or between students. Students at the primary level will also be using Seesaw, which it does not feature any live interaction or video conferencing capability, and frankly doesn't feature the exchange of information or the interactive functions beyond what Microsoft Teams does, but Seesaw does make those available on a much more age-appropriate level and in a way which primary age students in grades kindergarten 1 and 2 should better be able to navigate. So Microsoft Teams will be the consistent learning management platform. We will move away from a more haphazard and scattered approach wherein some teachers would have employed just email to interact with students, some teachers may have employed Zoom, some teachers may have employed WebEx, some teachers may have employed a YouTube channel, to a more consistent use of Microsoft Teams with some seesaw use for those primary age students. Another very important and significant consideration has to do with the deployment of devices, and this is perhaps the single most common area or topic of question which we have received. There's a lot of good news insofar as device deployment is concerned, notably that the district currently has and has been building this capacity for the last few years as we've moved towards a one-to-one deployment level. We currently have between 1,100 and 1,200 student devices available for deployment. We are abandoning, for the time being, our deployment of these devices on a grade-specific level. For the past 2 years, in the pre-pandemic setting, students received these devices if they were in certain grade cohorts, and we would deploy them universally in those selected grades. That will no longer be the approach, and instead we will be using a system of deploying devices wherever the need exists, and allowing what is often referred to as a bring your own device, or the use of a family owned device wherever that is available and frankly preferred by the family. Through those two strategies, we believe with great certainty, in fact, that all students will be able to use a device, and that we will have sufficient devices available to support any student who requires one. As in the springtime, there will be some fairly extensive technology supports available for families. Clearly, Microsoft Teams as our learning management platform is not something with which all families and students are yet familiar, and we will have some tutorials, including some live events, to help train or educate people about the use of that platform. As before, as in the springtime, there will be a help desk available for assistance. In fact, we will have this fall both an email and telephone-based system available for technology supports for families. I think before moving on from technology, I will simply stress and reiterate that there will be adequate devices available to support any student needs. Families are welcome and encouraged to use the devices that they already possess, but when such is not the case, when there is a student need for a device, we have units, and good units at that, available for deployment. One area of some confusion and misinformation at the time of release of the district's initial reopening plan was that of building expectations, most notably in the area of mask wearing. The reopening plans reflected the state standard of mask wearing, which expressed simply that masks will be worn at times when social distancing is not possible. From the onset, it was the intention of the Reopening Planning Committee and school administrators, and I think the larger school community, to implement building expectations and behavioral expectations which exceed that standard. And that was, I believe, referenced in the plan. It was articulated somewhat more clearly in the updated draft reopening plan. But again, from the onset, greater detail about expectations for things like mask wearing were always going to occur. More specifically, students will be, and I will say that a detailed summary of these building expectations about topics related to COVID is included in the updated draft reopening plan as an appendix. But therein you will see that mask wearing is essentially required by all individuals in the school setting essentially all day long. There are certain exceptions which are spelled out in that plan, and these include periods of eating when students are adequately spaced, periods of outdoor activity, again when students are adequately spaced, and designated mask breaks, and those are described in some detail in the appendix of the reopening plan. Essentially, they involve a designated portion of the classroom remote from other students, remote being distant from other students, still in the same room. Ideally near a window, though if not possible near a window in a distance portion of the classroom where students at the teacher's direction will be able to briefly remove their mask. We also anticipate some fairly regular outdoor mask breaks wherein entire classes with their teacher and at their teacher's direction, or individual or small groups of students with the assistance of paraprofessionals may be escorted out of doors for mask breaks. Again, more detail about mask wearing is contained in the plan, but please know and have comfort with the fact that mask wearing will be expected essentially all day long at all times except for those clear and defined exceptions. Movements through the hallways has been another building expectation about which we've received some questioning. At the elementary level, the movement through the hallways will be limited somewhat vis-a-vis pre-pandemic situations and an environment, in that we will do our best to have special area teachers work with students in their home classroom. We will endeavor to keep classrooms and classes of students static while instead rotating teachers amongst those. That can't happen perfectly. There will surely be some activities in perhaps art or music which would best take place in the designated art and music or special area instructional rooms. Some students will still need to travel between rooms to receive special education or related services, but at the elementary level, more so than at the secondary level, we do anticipate being able to keep classes of students static in a given room for fairly significant portions of the day. I guess another clear exception to that would be instances where the teacher may move their class and their instruction outdoors, which we will encourage and for which we are establishing a number of outdoor seating areas throughout our buildings. Food consumption is an important consideration, and we anticipate that this will still take place in the cafeterias. Frankly, we are better able to space students within the cafeteria setting than we are in individual classrooms. As with some instruction, we will encourage lunch monitors to take groups of students outside into some established seating areas for food consumption. I've received a number of questions about the provision of free and reduced or free breakfast and lunch, and I will speak to that somewhat later in this presentation. Building entry has been another topic of frequent questions. The plan spells out, but I will review right now. We will employ multiple points of entry at our various buildings so as to minimize the density of students at any one point of entry. Each building will communicate which entries or which doors specific grades of students should use. Those entries will also be furnished with some visual reminders about spacing on the ground, sidewalk chalk and the like, to indicate to students where they should stand and how they should not congregate. And at entry, everyone, this includes students and parents who may be accompanying students, will be expected to wear a mask. Recess is anticipated to be a much more controlled process than it has been in pre-pandemic times. I foresee group walks led by monitors as a commonplace activity. Masks will be worn unless students can be spaced and as directed by the monitors, but we should all expect that the recess will be a somewhat more necessarily demure and controlled period of time. A number of questions have centered upon what we will do if there is non-compliance with these building expectations, and the answer there simply is we will do what we always do when there is non-compliance with building expectations, which have always existed in a host of areas, whether it's student conduct or dress code or the like. We will educate students about the expectations. We will reinforce those expectations. And if the need arises, we will handle those as a matter of discipline. But teaching is what we do, and enforcing behavioral expectations is what our teachers do very well. And we will continue to do that now in these new and important areas. as I've done before and will continue to do, I need to stress the need for flexibility. I shared with you, and I do not do so to be alarmist, that it is entirely possible that we may be moving between and amongst the various modes of instruction as the fall progresses. There's a lot of factors that could cause that. I've listed them before, but I will list them again. An increasing regional infection rate could necessitate a conversion or transition to full closure. So too could the actual incidence of cases within our school community. Issues of student and staff attendance and whether we have the adequate attendance to operate a safe school environment could be a factor in determining our transition between modes. And of course, any decree from the governor, as happened in the springtime, could drive a transition between modes. In the last week, I've read a number of articles and have been made aware that the statewide trend, and it seems to be a prominent trend, is a movement towards remote instruction to start the school year. A number of districts, and in some statewide, and in some cases even entire BOCES regions worth of districts, have opted to start in remote instruction, though they had previously planned to start in-person or hybrid instruction. That's not the case of yet in our area, but I do think it's important to note that the general anxiety and stress about school reopening is manifesting itself in other places of the state in the form of transition or a change to full closure, full remote start of the school year. Childcare is an area which became of great concern and consideration for some families when our reopening plan was updated so as to feature a projected start in the hybrid mode of instructional delivery. I do not have specific information to share with you as of yet, but it's important for those parents to note that district personnel continue to work very, very hard on this topic. As with the spring closure, we will endeavor to work with the YMCA to develop child care solution for those families who need such. As I said, these plans aren't yet fully developed, but I do know that in addition to district personnel, our partners at the YMCA are working very, very hard. We are prepared and willing to support the development of an affordable, convenient child care system by making space in our district, specifically in the Dukin building, wherein the gymnasium and at least 2 classrooms could be made available, and by directing some CARES Act funding to subsidize the cost of this care for our parents. I'm sorry that I don't yet have further details. I know that our partners at the YMCA are working very hard on developing a child care plan specifically built around our district's hybrid reopening model, and I look forward to sharing further information about that with families as soon as possible. For reasons totally unrelated to the pandemic, this year's calendar had featured a very early start of the school year. This is entirely driven by the date of Regents exams as determined and dictated by the state, and by the days on which statutory holidays fall relative to weekends, and therefore the length of certain holidays, notably the Christmas recess. Because of those factors, this year was set to feature a pre-Labor Day start, which is a very unusual and atypical circumstance. But again, that scheduling had nothing to do with the pandemic. We've received a great deal of feedback of late in support of a slightly delayed school opening, and I can tell you, and is as listed in the plan, we are now planning for that. More specifically, the days of the calendar will now shape up as follows. September 1st will remain a Superintendent's Day, a day on which faculty staff will report and prepare for the year. It will be the first day for teachers. Students will not attend, just as they had not planned to attend under the previous calendar. But where September 2nd had been scheduled to be the first day of school for students, it no longer will be. We will be moving or redeploying a Superintendent's Day from October to September 2nd, Faculty will still report. They will continue to prepare for the school year. Students will not need to report on September 2nd as had been originally planned. Similarly, September 3rd, which was to be the second day of school for students, will now be a emergency closure or snow day. We have 4 such days built into our calendar. We will redeploy one of those days, leaving us obviously with three, which will hopefully still be a workable number as we navigate winter weather. And what that means is that neither students nor faculty will report on September 3rd. It will be an emergency closure or snow day. September 4th through 7th will remain the scheduled Labor Day weekend. There is no change there. And what all of this means is that the first day of school for students, and therefore for students and teachers together, will be Tuesday, September 8th. This provides all parties with a little bit more time to get ready for, get mentally prepared for the reopening of school under such unusual circumstances. I'll move now to a series of questions that were posed that perhaps weren't explicitly and specifically addressed in tonight's presentation. We'll close with these. I have a number of them, and I'll just work through them in no particular order. A number of questions have centered upon the movement between the parent remote option, which, as I covered earlier, has been introduced into the plan, and in-person or hybrid modes of delivery. How easily can parents choose to move their child out of in-person or hybrid instruction into the remote option or back therefrom? And the answer differs depending on which direction that movement will occur. An exit from in-person or hybrid delivery of instruction can happen fairly quickly. It requires the submission of a form, and that form is appended to the reopening plan, is one of the appendices, and a brief meeting with the exit meeting, if you will, with the school principal, just so that parents understand the nature of parent remote option and what's involved in such. We do ask that families who know now or will decide soon that they prefer the parent remote option, we ask that they notify their building principal via the submission of that enrollment form by August 28th. That will best allow us to prepare for the start of the school year. But do know that thereafter, after the start of the school year, if for whatever reason the family elects they wish to move away from in-person or hybrid instruction to the remote option, it's doable in fairly short order. The same is not necessarily true in reverse, though. In order to allow teachers to best plan, to keep the established groupings manageable, a return to in-person or hybrid instruction from the remote option will take place only at the 10-week marking periods. Again, those details are all listed on the parent enrollment for the remote option form, which again is an appendix of the reopening plan. We received a number of questions asking specifically why Monday and Thursday or Tuesday and Friday were selected as the in-person days for Group 1 and Group 2 respectively, as opposed to Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, Friday, and the answer is very straightforward and simple. Our reopening planning committee, and I believe all personnel involved with the school district, value teacher-student contact time and recognize that when students and teachers do not have the ability to interact, there can be regression. There is regression. A Monday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Friday arrangement in the hybrid system lessens the gap between that student and teacher interaction. So if you would consider a Monday, Tuesday arrangement, as I'm aware some districts are employing, students would not see their teachers in person from Tuesday at 3 p.m. until the next Monday at 8 p.m. And that's a significant gap which we wanted to work hard to avoid. That is the primary and really frankly the sole reason for which a Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday rotation system was adopted. It is in students' best interest because it minimizes their gap between teacher contacts. A number of questions have centered upon the Group 1, Group 2 assignments, and parents specifically would like to know if it's possible to have their students changed or moved from one group to the other. The short answer is yes. I will tell you that we would prefer not to receive parent requests for student movement between Group 1 and Group 2 for reasons such as being with students wanting to be with their friends, or more specifically at the secondary level, wanting to be in the same group as a boyfriend and girlfriend, though we may still be in a position to accommodate those. Our class sizes are, and I'm very proud of this, comparatively low with other larger districts anyhow. Our full class sizes as we enter this year are projected to range at the elementary level between 16 and 22 students. Some portion of those students and their parents will opt for the remote option. We will see what that number is, but we acknowledge that there will be some degree of reduction in each class cohort because of the parent remote option. And then with the splitting of the cohort into distinct groups, 1 and 2, I anticipate that we'll be dealing with between 5 and 10 student classes on any day of hybrid direct instruction. That gives us a great deal of flexibility to allow movement between those groups. The plan specifically expresses or illustrates that students, for instance, living in the same household but that may have siblings may have different names, would certainly be allowed to, at parent request, move to the same group. I do expect we'll be able to accommodate requests for other reasons as well. So in short, movement between groups should be possible. I've received a number of very specific and very appropriate inquiries about cousins with different last names but who share after-school childcare wanting to be in the same group. I do believe we can accommodate those. I would ask that those questions and requests be directed to the building principals. I've received a number of questions about co-curricular and special events, and I admit that these are perhaps of greater interest for students at the secondary level, but we do still have some elementary clubs, and some of those activities are sources of great pride for the entire school district community, not just secondary students. Most of those remain either postponed or yet unknown. Interscholastic athletics, most other secondary events are on hold, and again, I know these are not of great interest to elementary students, but in a moment I will address an area where these dovetail, which are school open houses and orientations. Most of those high concentration of people, special events, remain postponed for now. A number of questions have centered upon physical education class and what that will look like. And again, these are somewhat more easily answered at the elementary level where students don't change out. There's no need to change for swimming as in phys ed classes at the middle school. Nonetheless, I do think it's important to note that physical education class will look quite different. Outdoor, spaced, controlled activities will likely be the norm. Again, we will surely see much more controlled activities than in times past, and so please know that physical education class will necessarily be altered and look very different in this COVID era. A number of questions have dealt with whether students are allowed to bring their lunch from home, and the short answer is yes. Students are most certainly still allowed to bring their lunches from home. It's important to note at this time that the district will continue to provide free breakfast and lunches for all students, whether they are attending in person on any given day or whether they are studying remotely on any given day, or on Wednesdays when all students will be studying remotely. As in the spring, we will make meals available for students regardless of their circumstance. That also includes students for whom the parents elect the remote option. But if a homemade lunch is preferred vis-a-vis the free school lunch, that's not a problem, and students are absolutely welcome to still bring those. It is important to note, however, and this applies to any form that lunch takes, that there can be no sharing of food. Students, whether they bring a lunch from home or receive a meal from school, will need to eat their own and not share food amongst themselves. A number of questions have centered upon whether or not there will be outdoor classes. The short answer is yes, but there will be no specific scheduling of outdoor classes. We, of course, can't predict the weather and can't predict when it might rain. But outdoor instructional spaces will be made available, and teachers will both be able to and be encouraged to take their classes outside. So we should expect to see a markedly increased level of outdoor instruction and activity. A number of parents have expressed concern that they're having a difficult time getting to see their pediatrician and that they might not have all of the requisite school forms completed by the start of school. And for the most part, that will be okay. The state has made some specific allowances for this, and I would encourage any parent who find themselves in this situation to simply contact their school nurse to express which elements of the required paperwork are not yet available or that you don't possess, and the nurse can guide you through that. But do know that the state has recognized that constraint and made some allowances therefore. We've received a number of special education questions, and I'm not going to address those tonight because most of them are very specific to individual student needs, and some of them tread very directly on matters of privacy. However, for any student parents in our audience tonight, I do ask that if you have questions, and you should know that we encourage and welcome them, that you reach out to Glenn Herlock, our district's Director of Special Education, with these. I've already referred a number of these questions to him, and he has responded directly to parents. He is delighted to continue to do the same. You may send those questions to the same email address at which many of the questions I'm addressing tonight have been sent. That is questions@plattscsd.org, or you may send them directly to Mr. Herlock at gherlock, that's GHURLOCK @plattscsd.org. School open houses and student orientations are amongst the most exciting aspect of the school year and a hallmark of the fall reopening. And unfortunately, these clearly cannot happen in the same form that they have happened in the past. That said, everyone involved in the school community values these, and school buildings are currently exploring ways to still conduct these either in a virtual form, in a series of much smaller and spacing compatible events. Look for more information about these coming directly from the schools soon. And finally, a question, a recurring question, which we've received, dealt with this. If on Wednesdays are unified instruction days, my child cannot be available for the live instruction, will it be recorded so they can view it later? And I will answer that in a moment, but I first need to express and again implore families to do everything they can to make their students available during the daytime hours on Wednesday so they can participate in those unified Wednesdays, live, direct interaction with the teachers. These are not just viewings of lessons. These are opportunities wherein students will be able to interact, albeit online, with their teacher and with their classmates. And that is a rich opportunity that we would be saddened if students miss. So I will first strongly encourage families to make their children available on Wednesdays for that. However, in the event that that's not possible, those lessons will indeed be recorded and posted to Microsoft Teams so that families can view them later, or frankly so that students or families who participate live in those can review them at a later time. Those are the questions in large part that we've received. Again, if your questions were more specific, if your questions arrived somewhat later, we will continue to address these on a direct and individual basis. I do thank everyone who submitted questions and encourage that you continue to advance these to us. We are working very, very hard to respond to these. Obviously, none of us knows what the future will hold, and I will say again that flexibility as we move through this most difficult of school reopenings remains paramount. I do thank you for your flexibility. I do thank you on behalf of all my colleagues for your patience. We absolutely recognize that this is a stressful situation. I can tell you that my colleagues and I feel similarly and are experiencing many of the same range of emotions, as are you. and as are your children, our students. We respect parent decisions, whether that is to send their child or to elect the parent remote option. We do respect those decisions. Again, if you have additional questions, we invite them. There will be another parent presentation tomorrow night, which will focus more specifically upon topics of interest to secondary students and parents. There will be another presentation on Wednesday at 3 p.m., which will review both elementary and secondary considerations. And as always, we invite your email outreach and email questioning. I thank you for your time. I wish you all health and comfort as we move towards school reopening. Thank you, everyone.